This isn't your typical story of one empire conquering another. It's actually something way, way stranger. This is the story of how a single private company, a for-profit corporation, ended up taking over the entire subcontinent of India. So let's break down the unbelievable story of the East India Company.
I mean, that's the big question, isn't it? How on earth does a company whose whole reason for being is to make money for its shareholders end up ruling over millions of people with its own private army? It sounds completely made up, but it really happened, and that's exactly what we're going to get into.
All right, so where does this all begin? What was the initial spark? Why India? Well, to get that, you have to understand what India meant to the rest of the world for centuries. It wasn't just another place on the map. It was this legendary land of almost unimaginable wealth. For ages, India was famously known as Sone ki Chiriya, the golden bird. And listen, this wasn't just some poetic nickname, it was a literal description of its incredible prosperity, its vast resources, and its central place in global trade. It was an irresistible prize for anyone with ambition.
So, what was actually in this incredible treasure chest? Well, you had aromatic spices that were worth more than their weight in gold back in Europe. You had legendary gold and diamond mines, and super important, you had these amazing textiles, like muslin, that were so fine, nobody else in the world could make them. India wasn't just rich, it was the world's manufacturing hub.
And just look at the contrast here. At the time, Britain was mostly an agricultural country, and it was still recovering from its own civil war. India, on the other hand, was a global economic powerhouse with huge established empires and massive royal treasuries. This huge difference created a powerful magnetic pole. The British weren't just exploring, they were chasing a level of fortune they couldn't even dream of back home.
So, how did they get their foot in the door? You might be thinking this all started with warships and armies, right? Nope, not even close. It started much, much quieter than that. The first knock on India's door didn't come from the British Crown. It came from a London boardroom full of shareholders.
And get this was not some quick smash and grab. The East India Company was formed way back in 1600. They didn't even land in India until 1608. And even then, it took another 7 years of constant effort and diplomacy before Sir Thomas Roe finally convinced the Mughal Emperor Jahangir to let them trade. They were playing the long game. And it is so important to remember, the British were kinda late to the party. They were the new kids on the block. The Portuguese, the Dutch, the French, they were already there, and they were all fiercely competing for a slice of the Indian pie. So the East India Company didn't just have to deal with Indian rulers, they had to outsmart their European rivals too.
Okay, this next part, this is where everything changes. This is the pivot. The company quickly figured out that real, lasting profit wasn't going to come from just trading. It was going to come from control, and they found the perfect key to unlock that control. A sinister but devastatingly effective policy we all know as divide and rule. Now, let's be super clear about this. The British didn't create the divisions in India. The rivalries between kingdoms were already there, but what they did was they became absolute masters at exploiting them. They looked at this complex web of kingdoms and saw a blueprint for conquest. They basically turned Indians against each other for their own benefit. And here's their playbook. It was shockingly simple, and it worked almost every single time. Step 1. Find 2 local kingdoms that already hate each other. Step 2. Offer your modern military help to one side in exchange for favors down the road. Step 3. After your side wins, you collect your payment, land, money, political power. And while all the Indian kingdoms are busy fighting each other, you use your new power to kick your European competitors out. It was absolutely brutal and brilliant in a dark way. Remember this year, 1757, the Battle of Plassey. This is the turning point. This is when the company's army beats the Nawab of Bengal. And with that one battle, a trading corporation becomes a government. The mask is off. The era of just trading is over, and the era of conquest truly begins. So once they had political power, the whole game changed. It wasn't about negotiating trade deals anymore. Oh no. The focus shifted to outright plunder and exploitation on a scale that India had just never seen before. I want you to just let this number sink in for a minute. Over 200,000. That's how many soldiers were in the East India Company's private army. A private army for a corporation.
This army wasn't there to defend a nation. It was there to enforce contracts, collect taxes, and absolutely crush anyone who resisted the company's economic takeover.
And this quote, I mean, it just says it all, doesn't it? It captures the human cost of all of this. These were people who were part of rich cultures and powerful empires, and now they were being forced to work to increase the profit margins for a bunch of shareholders halfway across the world. Their land, their freedom, their wealth, all of it, gone. What they built was just this horrifying machine designed for one thing: profit. On one end, you shove in India's resources, you loot the treasuries, you slap on crippling new taxes, and you force artisans and farmers to make goods for next to nothing. And on the other end, out comes pure profit for the company. The system didn't just drain wealth, it shattered the Indian economy, leading to incredible poverty and devastating famines. But you know what they say, you can only push people so far. And after 100 years of this brutal exploitation, something had to give. The people of India began to push back, and the long, hard road to freedom was about to begin. All across the subcontinent, all that anger and resentment that had been simmering for decades over stolen lands, destroyed industries, and just brutal treatment, it finally boiled over. The first sparks of organized resistance started to catch fire, sending a clear message that the people of India would not be slaves forever. The year 1857 and the Great Indian Rebellion. That was the big one. That was the catalyst. And while the rebellion was eventually put down, it shook the British so badly that it spelled the end of the company's rule. The British Crown stepped in and took direct control, but the fire of independence was lit. The company itself was officially shut down in 1874, but the fight for freedom would rage on for another 90 years, until India finally won its independence in 1947. So after all of that, what's the big lesson here? What's the takeaway? When you think about it, the company's most powerful weapon was never its guns. It was division. They took existing rivalries and exploited them, turning Indian against Indian. And in all that chaos, they just walked in and took over. So the most powerful lesson from this whole story is maybe the simplest one. Stay united, because a divided people can be conquered, but a united people are unbreakable.